we're here to talk about the question, what might be the right boat size for you?
Of course, that depends on what kind of sailing you want to do, with whom, where you want to sail to, what kind of equipment you want to have on board, and it also depends on your budget.
And I'm here with Marie.
And I'm here with Torsten, and I've been here for the past 3 days and we've had the opportunity to go out and sail the 35 DS, the 40 DS, and also have a good look at the 310 DS. So I think we have a nice basis to compare the three boat models and just to speak about the perfect boat size in general.
And we came in contact about the boat show in Düsseldorf, where you approached us to ask if you can make a video about our 35. What was a bit of a surprise for me. So what was the reason?
Basically, I went cruising about 5 years ago, and ever since then I've been looking for another good boat to go cruising with. And you look at so many different boats and you sort of get a very good idea of what kind of features you'd like on your boat, what kind of size boat you would like, and so on. And for me, I came up with the, for me, perfect boat, the Sirius 35 DS. So I asked Torsten if I could make a little video about that. And then afterwards we got talking and he said, well, why don't you come over here and we can have a sail together? So yeah, that's why I'm here.
So why the Sirius 35 DS? You were on a long-term cruise with the 35?
Yeah, I was on a Marlowe 35 from the 1980s, so a pretty old lady, pretty heavy. Center cockpit, aft cabin, so very, classic layout back in the 80s. And it was a great boat, absolutely, but, and there's the but, I just love the concept of the Decksaloon because it just gives you this additional living space, and that's why when I first saw your boats, I was totally taken aback because I had never seen anything quite like it before. I mean, I'd seen other Decksaloon boats, but they, for example, only had the steering wheel in the saloon part, but the actual like a pilot house, but the actual saloon was down in the cellar. So seeing this was just, it made me say wow, because it just seems like a very good way to use all that space, even though it's only 35 feet. So that's why I asked you if I could make that video.
So I guess when you're on a cruise, when you're doing anything, you're always thinking of something better. What might be bigger usually. So had you thought the next boat have to be bigger than the one before?
I always thought that maybe 37 feet might be nice. I thought, well, 35 feet is pretty good, but I could use a little more storage space, a little more this, a little more that. But then looking at this 35 footer, I figured, well, actually you don't need any more space because this has plenty of space and very good solutions to use all that space.
It might be said that this is a bit cheating, I might say, because we're talking about a Sirius 31, 35 and 40 feet model. You probably have to know that it's a very special layout. You mentioned the Decksaloon, which is quite different to many other boats which have a flush deck, but the main difference in the term of size, and it might be slightly misleading, is that we have more space to work out, because on all the boats you have the biggest space in the center of the boat, in the very middle of the boat, where usually the saloon is based and maybe the galley is based. It's also true for Sirius Yachts, but because we are building it in 1.5 levels, we also have, at the same plan, we have a fantastic central cabin underneath, a workshop underneath, and huge storage. So if you walk down a jetty and you want to find something comparable to this 35 DS, you actually probably have to look at 40, 41 feet.
So was this also one of the motivations in designing that boat?
Actually, it led to this very size of the boat, because the motivation to design this specific boat was the question what features you have to have on board to work for most of the people, for most of the customers. And we are building boats since 49 years now. Well, the Sirius company is building boats for 49 years now, and there has been many sizes over these years. It's Decksaloon for us only since 1988, but we had our biggest model, our biggest seller was the Sirius 32 DS, which was a big boat at one stage. Boats are slightly getting bigger, But we have to build this in 18 different interior versions because you can't have everything on one boat, which led to the question how a boat has to look and what features a boat has to have, where you don't need these versions because it's everything in already. And I figured out from all the talks I had to customers that if you have 2 bedrooms which are equal, where you don't have to ask yourself if you want to move out of your cabin to give that to your parents-in-law or to your good friends. So 2 cabins which are nice enough to have 4 people on board, nice heads, a separate shower cabin because that's the way it really works on board, a nice workshop and a chart table and our Decksaloon concept on top brought us to the features we have to have. And then we ask ourselves how big a room must be to be comfortable. And in drawing all this together, we didn't want to go bigger than necessary, especially here in this area of sailing in the Baltic, where you might have narrow harbor spaces in cute little harbors up in Denmark or Sweden. So the 35, I would say, is in my picture the ideal boat in the smallest size you can get it, and still everything feels comfy.
Still as big as necessary. Yeah.
Correct.
But then you also built the 310 DS, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I've seen the boat. It looks very similar. It's just all a bit scaled down. You can't even notice it unless you go from one boat to the other directly. If you spend more than 10 seconds apart, it's very hard to grasp the differences. So would you say, you know, are there any shortcomings that you can think of why somebody might choose the 35 instead of the 310?
And again, that depends, because as we're talking about boat sizes, it happens to be not only personal choice, it also might be restrictions in sizes you can have. So if you look at lakes in Switzerland or Lake Constance, or so where certain widths are not to be overtaken or certain lengths not allowed or something like that, you go down, then of course it's a budget question. But I won't say that you have the same features on the 35 than on the 310. The 310 is smaller. The trick is we are still building these 18 different interior versions on a 310, so you can have each and everything you see on a 35 or on a 40 in a 310 individually built, even bigger than on the other boats, but not all at the same time. So you have to make your priorities, and the priorities might be, for example, in crew size. So you went cruising with
2 people.
Okay.
As is the usual setup, right? I mean, most cruisers are couples, right? So,
yes.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you mentioned lakes before, you know, taking the 310 on lakes. Do you think you could also take it around the world?
Absolutely. Well, there have been circumnavigations with many smaller boats. Also, if I count our circumnavigations made in Sirius Yachts, most of them are made with the 32 and 31 feet models, but that's also because they've been built in bigger numbers, and I won't be worried about taking a 310 on the ocean. But then again, it's a question how many people you have on board. You can sleep 4 or even 6, but the question is how much personal space you need in that. And then if we talk long distance sailing, it's also a question of how settles a boat in the water, in the wave, what cruising speed, what average what you want to average to get away with that, and what features you want to have on board.
Yes, because obviously you do have a space restriction, so you won't have space for liters and liters of tanks for diesel and water, plus a water generator, or even, you know, a generator, fuel generator, compressor for diving, and so on. If you want all that, then that boat is going to have its limits, of course.
Yes, unless you compromise on some other spaces, and this is what we do with these 18 different interior versions, because there is the typical, one of the typical setups is a 4-2 version, where you say, well, on a 310, on a 31 feet boat, we will only be 2 people and very seldom guests. So you compromise on one of the bedrooms, and then you can have a huge technic room where you can actually have a tumble dryer and a washing machine and a generator. But then there's also a restriction in the total weight you want to take with you on a certain waterline lengths. So what equipment, what heavy stuff you had on your boat?
We didn't actually have that much heavy stuff. Of course, we had solar panels and a wind generator, and we carried a lot of water and diesel, of course. But apart from that, we tried to stick to a minimum. But you know, when all the tanks were filled up, you could tell that the water line would sort of drop down.
That also slows the boat down a bit. I think the general speed of that's the topic which we often been asked. It's how much miles you want to do a day. Was that important for you when you were on a long cruise on blue water sailing?
It really wasn't that important for me personally, unless there was very little wind and you'd make 60 miles a day. That was pretty frustrating after a couple of days. But apart from that, no, for me personally, it doesn't matter that much, you know, whether you do an Atlantic crossing in 21 days, 23 days, 25 days. Really doesn't matter as much, I think, personally.
Yeah. Well, if we are talking displacement boats and not gliders, you can't outrun a weather system or something like that anyhow. So the difference in speed on a displacement boat, on a more heavy boat generally, on a cruising boat generally, even cruising catamarans, are also depending on the waterline lengths. So it doesn't really matter as long as you have enough sails to put up when it's light wind. It's the waterline lengths which defines how many miles you could get in 24 hours. And the difference, for example, on a 310, the theoretical hull speed is 7.14. On a 35, it's 7.5. And on the 40, it's 7.9. So the total difference in speed is not that much.
That's true. But it adds up. If you do a lot of miles, then yeah. So what made you decide to build a 40-footer as well? Because before you said, hey, let's do a boat that you can fit everything into, and you ended up with 35 feet. So what made you go for a 40-footer as well?
Well, I have to say I was very happy with the 35 as well. And I was kind of offended sometimes when people step on the boat show into the cockpit and say, oh, that's a bit small. And I always thought, what? It's a 2 meter 5, so it's a full stretched out length where you can lie down, and you can move around. We have this canting wheel which you can bring from side to side, and I thought that's what you need. And coming into the saloon, it was just like what I feel, what I need. But then again, it was customer requirements who came up with more and more features sometimes, as we mentioned, having a water maker, having a washing machine, tumble dryer, and a generator, and maybe even some diving equipment. And suddenly you start to think, well, even if it's 41 feet inside, it's still 35 feet, and we struggled a bit with the decision of going bigger, but in the end it was just right, because it became a boat which was very popular, and even now we are thinking if it might make sense to go even a bit bigger.
Oh. So speaking of decisions, how do your customers decide which boat is right for them?
Well, most of them come with a pretty good idea of what size is the ideal size for but then there are some surprises, because we very often have customers who think that their next boat must be 42, 43 or even 40, 45 feet, and then they come and see the 40 and think, wow, 6 beds, so 3 nice cabins and 2 hats, and when we have a look on a 35, then ever so often people step through it and think, well, this might be big enough. But then we literally always come back to the questions we have asked at the beginning, or the points we have raised at the beginning, and this is, where do you want to sail? How many people you like to have on board? What is your kind and type of sailing? And how much equipment you want to have on board.
So if you want to have a lot of equipment, you would probably, I'm guessing, recommend the 40?
Well, that goes hand in hand with how much time you want to spend on board, I think, because it is also a question of how do you want to live and how much personal space you need. But then, yes, on a bigger boat, you have generally more possibilities for heavy equipment as well. If we're talking lots of comfort, I mean, we have boats today with dishwashers and washing machines and tumble dryers. We already mentioned, to talk of the strange stuff. But then there are hobbies like diving equipment, diving compressors, a lot of energy sources you want to cover. But you might also want to be more adventurous with a hard bottom, a dinghy and a big outboard on it, which you can do on a 40, but which might also lead then to an even bigger boat behind that.
So in your opinion, can a boat be too big?
Yes, I think so. But again, that depends on the points we mentioned earlier. So how many people you have on board, how much personal space you need. But it is probably a good question of physical force also in size.
And age probably, right?
Yeah. You have a lot of technical helpers today on boats. You could literally sail a 70 feet boat out sailing with no problem. But then it is coming back into the harbors, and it is having the wind picking a bit up and holding the boat away from a pylon or from the jetty. But it's also the technical helpers which has to be considered as something which could go wrong, and especially if we're talking of a long cruise, which could also fail.
That's true. So you should maybe be able to handle the boat all by yourself in an emergency, with your physical force, as it were.
That's at least a question which we have to ask if you go onto long distance or go anywhere, go to places where you might not get help that easily, or even mid-ocean somewhere. And I think the size where it gets difficult with physical stuff is about 42, 43 feet. Because from that size on, you can't bring Jenny back into the cockpit on your own, because it's just too heavy. You need electric and hydraulics to help you, and if they are there, that's fine. But if they're not, you should still be able to handle the boat.
And do you think, draft could be a topic, depending on your boat size? Usually the draft increases and you might not be able to go to all the places that you want to go.
That is a discussion. It's not an issue on Sirius Yachts, because we have 6 different keel versions, 5 to 6 different keel versions on each and every Sirius. So the 40 we have sailed on, for example, had only 1.45 meter draft as twin keels. We do swing keels where you can go anywhere. But yes, usually speaking, that's a big issue, because with a 40 feet boat you usually have 2 point plus something draft, and you can't do a lot of things which you still can with a smaller boat, like for example going through the French channels, going shallow areas, and also height might be an issue.
Oh yeah, height is definitely an issue. I did the Intracoastal Waterway on the US East Coast, and there all the bridges go up to, I think it's 65 feet, which is about 19.8 meters. But there's one bridge that's only 56 feet, so that's only about 17 meters, I think, or maybe almost 18.
Yeah.
So if you want to do that,
Yes, yeah. That's a pity for the 40, because it's nearly 20-meter air draft. The Intercoastal Waterway would have to be bypassed on the outside. The 35 might manage, or will manage. But yes. You have these areas. We have customers in Norway who have a bridge which they can go around, but then they need to make a big detour, and so we even do some special smaller rigs on a boat and just add some bigger head sails to incorporate that. But that's a very special requirement. But also beam might be. So when we developed the boats and the 3 models, that was an issue. The 35 had to be slim to be perfect for the boat show. But then having the 40, we didn't want to go longer than 12 meters and didn't want to go wider than 4 meters, because everything above that get exceptionally expensive if you come to the Mediterranean and you want to have a berth and a harbor place for that. You mentioned maneuverability in the harbor. I think that's not a big issue, because the base where you have the berths for the 40 feet or 45 feet boats, there are exceptionally more bigger and more space, then it's not linear to the berth where the 31 feet boats lie. So I think it's a bit easier there to maneuver around.
And you have all the technical helpers like the bow thruster and so on. So that helps a lot, I guess.
But talking of size, it's for sure also maintenance, and well, liters of anti-fouling you paint underneath and surfaces to polish and to clean. And so I think it's always clever to start by what do you really need, what features do you need, how much weight reserve you need, what's tankage, what's what you want to do, and then how much crew you have, and then go as small as possible to do that comfortably, and not as big as possible as you could afford.
Yeah, I guess that makes total sense. So now I think, you know, we've talked about different features on different boats and what's possible and what's not. What would you say are the main differences? I mean, maybe let's start with the cockpit.
Well, that's pretty obvious because on the 310 has a classical cockpit which 75 centimeters between the benches, so you can brace yourself on the opposite side when heeling, which is a very important thing. The next step you can make in the cockpit is 1.15 meter, because then it works with a bracing in the middle. If you have something in between, you have nothing to hold on, and everything which gets wider is then just the table in the middle gets wider to have the bracing, and that's very easy to see on these three boats. We have the 75 centimeters to brace on the opposite bench. We have the 1.15 meter on the 310 with the middle bracing, and then we have the big table in the 40 with the wider cockpit. It's also then the crew size again. So on the 310 you can comfortably sit in the cockpit with 6 people, but do you want that? You might have a tiller, then it's very easy because the cockpit is quite big, but if you have a wheel steering, it's a kind of a blockage in the cockpit, and you end up with a cockpit which is a more decent size for 2 to 4 people. On the 35 it's more space, you can come the wheel from side to side, or you can have it as a tiller. And then it's the 40 where the cockpit is even a good deal longer, so you can sit really and have a party out in the cockpit.
Yeah, and then you always have a wheel on the 40.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And then of course you also have a bathing platform on all the models?
Yes, all 3 models have a bathing platform, but again, there's a big difference. On the 310, you have to step into the cockpit by going up over the cockpit, over the transom. On the 35, there's enough space to have a door incorporated. You can step out on one level. That's very easy for people who can't move that easily. It's just comfortable if you have heavy stuff to bring on board, but it's also much loved by children and dogs and so on. And on the 40 you have all of that. Plus you can fold the whole transom down and have a nice bathing platform. But I always found the idea scary of coming back into harbor and having a bathing platform which you fold down first and then maybe bump into something and damage it. So even if the bathing platform is up, you have a door to the transom where you can step out, and then if the boat is safely moored, you just open the transom.
Pop it down.
If you want to. Yeah. Maybe you want to have more privacy and just leave it up.
Okay. And how about the cabin sizes? How do they differ? Because when I walked around the boats, I felt like, you know, especially the cabin midship was a very similar size, and the bed also. Was that just an illusion?
No, if you're talking bed sizes, that's a statement you can make. Because the length of the bed on all our boats and all our models is always 2.05 meters at a minimum for tall people. And then on a 310 it's already a very nice king size bed. And on the 35 it's literally nearly the same width, slightly wider with a little shelf on the side. And on the 40 we had to ask this question because we could make what's the next is queen size. So we could have made it 2 meters by 2 meters, but then we said, what for?
Yeah, who would need that?
And we said, no, it doesn't have to be bigger than on a 35. So we made it 1.6 meter wide. That's a very decent size for a cruising boat, and incorporated more shelves and more drawers in the galley on the opposite side.
Okay, and how about the head? Is the head, because I think that on the 35 and also on the 40 you have the head and then you have a separate shower, right?
That works perfectly well, yeah.
Yeah, but on the 31, do you have that?
Yes, you can.
Oh, you can. Okay.
That's one of the 18 layouts you can have as a separate shower cabin, but that's a big point in decision sometimes, because for some people the 31 doesn't offer much more than a 35 in case you don't need a shower cabin or in case you don't need a workshop. Whereas if you want to have a shower cabin, you need to take some of the space off the nice lofty feel in the front cabin. So that gets smaller. The bed stays the same size, but you get kind of a floor, which is a bit more like that. And the shower itself is also not that very big. It works quite well, but it's just enough. It's not what you would say as luxury, but you give something. You have to give something away for that opportunity, and this time it's space. And you can have the workshop. It could be even 3 times bigger than on a 35 and even bigger than on a 40, but then you have to give away one of the cabins. But you gain a huge, like 40 feet front cabin for that, and the heads come in a bit further back, so you get a much bigger heads than on a 40 again, and all that on a 31 feet boat. But yes, you have lost one cabin for that.
Well, I guess there's always a bit of compromise.
Yes.
If you're downsizing, of course.
It is.
So what other main differences would you say there are?
Well, funny enough, if we have people visiting us here for seeing a boat and testing a boat, we are in a lucky position that we have about 15 Sirius Yachts lying on this jetty with a key to every boat, even if it's a customer's boat, and are very happy to be able to show them. And there is sometimes the situation that people come with the idea of a 40, then have a look to a 35 and think, oh, well, that's quite nice. And then sometimes just for fun, I say, well, let's have a look on a 310 that's open as well. And when they sit into the saloon, the biggest surprise is sometimes they look around and say, it's the same size, isn't it? And then you say, no, it's not. It's much smaller. But the point is, and that's more Decksaloon feature than a boat size thing is, the impression of room you have comes from looking out of the windows and having the impression that you have all this space and all this way around.
Because the room doesn't end here.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Nice trick.
Yeah. But yes, the saloon is smaller and it's more optimized for the crew size you have. Again, I would say 31 feet is perfect for a couple, maybe with kids or small kids or very seldom guests. The 40 is the 35 is very comfy for a couple as well, but you can take guests for a period of time easily. Whereas the 40 is, well, it's also very nice for a couple. And if you live on board, especially for a longer time, you will make use of this space. And but it works perfect as a 6-bed version, even if you use it as storage. You can have a 6-bed version on a 35, but that gets a bit cramped. It's not possible really on a 31, or at least I won't take that into consideration.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess you get used to any size, you know, if it gets as big as this 40-footer, even if it's just 2 of you, after a while, you'll be used to it. And that's just how it goes, right?
Well, but it is an interesting question, because especially in the first impression, even from the size, something could be too big. We have talked about maneuverability and the feel that it might not be in your comfort zone to maneuver a bigger boat. I think that's just a question of getting used to it. But then when we developed the 40, we had done everything in 3D, and we of course wanted to get 8 people sitting around the saloon table. And when we make the mock-up, so we had the first hull, and we built a kind of a saloon just out of a few boards. My guys give me a shout and said, well, Torsten, come have a look, the saloon is ready. And I was just standing out there looking into the saloon and thought, no, that's not the way we will do it, because it looked huge. It looked really huge. And picturing myself just being me and my wife on board, I thought, so what we did is we got 8 dishes and 8 people, and then we start to make it smaller and smaller and smaller this side, so that it just works with 8 people, very comfortably with 6 people sitting around the table and dining and have enough space there. And then it's just a bit on the big side when you're just the 2 of you.
Yeah, I mean, this feels a bit big, right? We're on the 40-footer now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still getting used to it, but you know, I mean, my favorite boat would be the 35. I've said this before, just because, well, I'm a small person as well. So with me on the 40-footer, you know, for example, if I go into the front cabin, I can't even close the hatches because I'm so short. I would have to step up on the bed, which of course I could do if it was my boat, but since this is owned by different people, I wouldn't want to step on their bed. And you know, sitting in the cockpit, for example, the wheel feels big to me when I'm holding it. When I'm holding the wheel on the 35, it feels the right size, but this is just me maybe because I'm small, I don't know, but I guess it just depends on your gut feeling, really.
Yeah. It is a personal choice, not only budget and where you want to sail. I had one very interesting situation with a customer who had already owned one of our boats. He had a 31 before and wanted to upgrade to either a 32 or a 38 at the time, and which was quite a step up, bigger difference between a 35 and 40 and so. But after a day of testing, he said to me, Torsten, I would love to have a 38. I think it's a fantastic boat, and I'm sure I can handle it, and I could afford it. But the thing is, the 32 is like a trailer suit. It's just my size. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's just right. So in the end, it is personal feeling. What I have to say, being offended by people coming into the 35 cockpit and saying, oh, that's a bit small, for years, and always thinking, what are you talking about? We launched the 40, the first 40 in Southampton, and put the keels and the rig on it for the first time, and then had a test sail with Yachting Monthly, and only 3 days later we went to the boat show and had a world premiere. I was spending the weeks before in a yard a lot of time on the boat, and then I was 2 days on a new 40 setting it up, when one of my colleagues working on an older 35 in the same harbour said, Torsten, can you have a look, I have a question. And I came up the steps, it was ashore, came up the steps and stand in the cockpit of the 35 and thought, oh, that's a bit small. And then I went in and I thought, ooh, because I was just after a few days, I was so used to the size. Again, it's always a trick of how big a boat must be for your personal feel and for the way you want to live on board.
So, if you had a choice, what would your personal choice be?
Well, I will refer that back to what kind of sailing I want to do. And as that's not day sailing, but long distance sailing, blue water sailing, I think it would be the 40.
It would be the 40? Mm-hmm. Why not the 35?
Well, I would do it with a 35, and if I had a chance, I would do it with a 310 as well. But it is, if you live on board for months on end, or even years, and if that's your living space, I think it's nice to have the possibility to have your room and have your distance. And well, while I'm still working, having 2 screens set up here, and my wife sitting there with a laptop, and Linus playing around here, or just even making the breakfast table in the way we like it. It's it looks like a big table, but it gets crowded after a while.
Yeah,
I'm sure about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why you like the 40, but still, my personal preference would still be the 35.
And I'm very happy with that. We have a lot of discussion going on with people talking of the bigger boats, because if you have already 3 separated double cabins, 2 heads, a shower, a workshop, big cockpit lockers, the possibility to have a lot of equipment on board. So why would you want to have something even bigger than the 40? And I'm still struggle to get the answers from the customers. So what are the features or what are the rooms they have? And the funny thing is, most of them came back and said, well, Torsten, no, we would have less cabins than that. We don't need the aft cabin. We can go with 2 cabins. That's pretty fine. But then we want to have more storage. Or they say we just want to have the lines a bit more stretched, because designing a deck saloon is something which is a bit, it's get easier on the eye the longer you get a bit more stretched as well. And then it's the ease of movement in choppy waves. I guess it's not a problem on a long ocean wave, is it?
No, not really, no.
But then boats are heavier, they're setting a bit more settled. They might be a bit less moving on anchorage if they are bigger. And yes, and then the big point as well is still the equipment, how much equipment you want to have.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm very excited to see what you have in store and if you're going to make a bigger boat. So I can't wait for the boat show where you will present that, God knows when, but I'm really excited to follow that journey.
I watch this space.
All right, so do you think we've got everything about the different boat sizes? And
I think we still should have a look to a few details, but yes.
Yeah, we will, absolutely.
If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave us a comment if you have questions about the boats and we'll be happy to get back to you. Subscribe to our channel for more of our videos, and also, if you want to experience our boats firsthand, come and visit us in northern Germany or on various international boat shows. Thanks for watching and bye bye.